Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone everywhere who's joining us today. Welcome to the second day of the virtual 2021 Financial Inclusion Global Initiative Symposium. I'm Margaret Miller, lead financial sector economist at the World Bank, and it's really my pleasure to be one of the moderators for today's panel. The Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, as you just saw a bit in the slides, is a partnership between the World Bank Group, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure of the Bank for International Settlements, and it's supported, and the International Telecommunication Union, and it is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It accelerates, it's been founded to accelerate the implementation of country-led reform actions to meet national financial inclusion targets and ultimately the global goal of universal financial access. FIGI funds national implementation in 3 countries in particular, China, Egypt, and Mexico, and also supports working groups to tackle 3 sets of outstanding challenges for reaching universal financial access. 1 is electronic payment acceptance, 2 is digital ID for financial services, and the 3rd is for security, infrastructure, and trust. And the FIGI program also hosts 3 symposia. So thank you for joining us for the 3rd and final edition of the FIGI Symposium, which aims to provide a forum for dialogue amongst telecom and financial sector authorities, financial service providers, digital financial services providers, and related stakeholders to share experiences and perspectives on scaling up DFS. Before getting started, just a housekeeping issue or so. We wanted to raise that as part of this session, we will be soliciting questions from the audience through the Q&A function. So please pose these questions specifically within that Q&A chat feature, and we will try to address those throughout the session. I'd like to, as I mentioned, I'm Margaret Miller, and my co-moderator, who I'll pass the microphone, so to speak, to, is Thierry Geiger. Thierry is at the ITU, the senior economist and head of the ITU's ICT Data and Analytics Division. But before moving to Thierry, and he will introduce our panelists, I'd like to just make a couple of introductory remarks about the importance of this topic of women's leadership. Women are in finance, but they're not reaching leadership roles. According to data from Catalyst, women represent 50% or more of the people working in financial services in many countries, but are less represented in emerging markets. For example, the US, 54% of women of the financial services workforce are female. In Brazil, the number is 50%, but it drops in emerging markets, for example, South Africa, 30%, and India, 17%. And, even where you see that there are women in entry-level positions, they're not making it to the highest levels. According to data from Oliver Wyman Consulting, about 20% of the executive committee membership in financial services is women and 23% on board. So really still a ways to go. When you look at tech, the other part of the equation today, only about 35% of higher education graduates are female in STEM fields. And unfortunately, we see that young women, girls are interested in STEM. For example, research by MasterCard in India showed that 93% of girls ages 12 to 14 said they were really interested in STEM. But then more than a third of them said they were reluctant to pursue a career there because they felt those careers were male dominated and they didn't feel welcome. In the tech workforce, about 28.8% are women, with few exceptions. So if we could put up the first, I have 2 quick slides. Deloitte did a study specifically on Fintech, so merging tech and finance. And you can see the lightest green is women-only founded firms. The brighter green is where there's men and women, and blue is male only. So in 2019, women-only fintech firms received 500 million in startup funds. Men received 35 billion. And so there's a huge gap there in terms of leadership, for example, founders, because we know that firms where a founder is a woman, it's much more likely that the leadership is going to be more more equal. So why is this important? Just a few quick points. Attention to women as consumers. We know from our global Fintech data that women the gender gap continues to be one of the most important gaps in financial inclusion. There's concern about bias in technology and algorithms, both in terms of equal access to their technology and then potentially the risk of scaling up and replicating bias in online systems that may exist in physical world. There's the issue of vulnerabilities that women may face in terms of online. We know women are more likely to be victims of online abuse. How can the financial sector play its appropriate role in terms of payment systems and helping to mitigate that? And finally, if you could put on the last quick slide, it's the bottom line. More diverse teams create better results. And we know, for example, control of consumer spending, women are controlling a lot of spending. They even in conservative societies, often women are responsible for a lot of the purchases in the home and are rising in terms of their buying power at the corporate level and their ownership of businesses. So it's really just good common sense. It's business sense to be looking at how can we incorporate women and women's voices more in leadership. So with that, I will turn the program over to Thierry Geiger from the ITU to introduce this topic and our panelists. Thank you, Thierry.
Thanks a lot, Margaret, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. A pleasure to be here as well. I just wanted to say a few words about the gender gap in general. So it is not only obviously present in the field of in the financial sector. It is everywhere. It runs deep across the economy, across societies, but it is true that it is magnified in the financial sector, arguably. But gender disparities are everywhere, and they are shaped by age-old values, norms, biases, and if we want to get a sense of this generalized gender gap, we can turn to the Global Gender Gap Report put out by the World Economic Forum. And I happened to work there, and I was in charge of that report for a couple of years before moving to ITU. And this report looks at the 4 dimensions of the gender gap: education, health, economic empowerment, political participation. And we see that on all these dimensions there is a gap, although it has been almost closed when it comes to education, basic education and health, but it's still very deep in terms of economic empowerment and political participation. And the latest edition of the report shows that to close all these gaps, it would take 136 years at current pace, compared with just 99 years a year ago. And the forum in their analysis points to the COVID effect, which seems to predominantly affect women when it comes to the economic situation, and it has basically reopened some of the gaps that had been closed or almost closed. So just to complement what Margaret was saying regarding education in STEMs and the lack of female participation in this field. I mean, we already see that the jobs of tomorrow are, some of the jobs at least, are predominantly filled by male. And here I'm talking about big data, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, engineering, etc. In all these roles, women are clearly underrepresented. And that's obviously a concern. If we talk about leadership, the very fact that that women are not even entering these promising jobs, those that will grow in the coming years, is a concern. And that the other thing I wanted to mention is that the digital divide, which we measure at ITU, that's one of my job or my team's job is to measure the digital divide, including at the gender level. So So what we see is that there is still a gender gap, especially in developing countries. I mean, in LDCs particularly, 15% of women connect to the internet, use the internet on a regular basis, 15%, 15, compared with almost 30% of men. So this divide, which is reflected in other metrics, this divide contributes to this situation, in the economic, in terms of the economy and economic empowerment, access to jobs and etc. So this divide is also something that needs to be addressed. And obviously, when you have a divide in the digital, in terms of digital access, and a divide in the financial sector, these two gaps compound and explain why, when it comes to DFS, you have services predominantly developed by men and for a male population and under a leadership of a male leadership. And I think there is a whole there's a host of factors that combine, that explain the situation. Finally, I would just mention that ITU, we have a number of initiatives that aim to close this digital divide, and in particular the Equals initiative. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership that was founded in 2016, and it promotes access to ICT by women, ICT skills development among the women, and promote career opportunities. I'll conclude by saying that there is awareness about this issue. I think that's clear. There are a number of initiatives. We heard from Margaret. We have a number of ITU. There is a host of initiatives, so that's encouraging. There are trends, positive trends. There are solutions, but there is still a long way to go. So today we will hear from three great panelists. We'll hear about the solutions and their efforts to address these gender gaps. They are all very deeply committed to the cause. They come from different walks of life, different parts of the world, but they share the same passion for closing this gap. Three panelists. I will start with May Abud Naga. She's the first sub-governor in charge of the technical office of the governors of the Central Bank of Egypt. She boasts 3 decades of experience in banking, both in the private and sector and at the central bank. During her career, she has successfully promoted financial inclusions of SMEs and individuals. We also have Roshana Safar. She's the founder and president of the Cash Foundation in Pakistan. It's one of the most prominent microfinance institutions in the country that has been lending to almost 3 million female entrepreneurs since its foundation in 1995. We also have Laura Fernandez Lord. She's the head of Women Economic Empowerment at BBVA Microfinance Foundation in Spain. This foundation was set up by the BBVA Group in 2007 to promote economic development through microfinance and entrepreneurship, focusing on Latin America. Finally, unfortunately, Dr. Toraya Obahid, who is a champion of gender equity in Saudi Arabia, and around the Arab world and globally indeed, could not be. She was supposed to be with us. She could not due to a family emergency. We wish her and her family all the best. So I would like now to kick off the conversation and turn to the panelists to give brief opening remarks. May, if I can start with you, it would be great if, as part of your intervention, you could mention what the Central Bank of Egypt has been doing to advance women financial inclusion. So the floor is yours, May, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Terry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so thank you so much. Again, I would like to first thank the BIS, the World Bank, ITU, and all the organizers, the support team for putting this together. I would also like to thank you for choosing this topic. It's a very important topic. At the Central Bank of Egypt, I have really firsthand experience how women in leadership position can really influence policy direction, push the topic, push the gender diversity issue to the forefront of the agenda. And really, it's how the tone is set at the top. So if the tone is set well on the top, you'll find policies being issued, action plans set in place, targets. At the Central Bank, we've started very early on realizing that we need to understand more, we need to be able to measure and understand our gender gap. So maybe 5-6 years ago, we started probing and trying to collect data. We found that data is a challenge and we couldn't really identify our gap. So we started collecting sex disaggregated data. We created a data hub that is running perfectly now, collecting data by ID and really being able to segregate products, different types of services, all sorts of supply side services. So that's in place now, and now we are able to identify the gender gap very, very nicely. We've also issued a definition for women-owned business for the banking sector, for the financial sector. It was adopted by, it's now coming close to being a national definition, whereby we would like to reach a stage where we can also identify the gap on the level of corporates, which is a challenge, of course. We are conducting and we have conducted a demand side survey to understand the reasons for inclusion. This demand survey has a gender lens and really it's put on the forefront of our framework for financial inclusion. A huge pillar is set for women financial inclusion, women financial education. We have many projects that tackle women, and most of them are pushed, funded by the central bank and by the banking sector. We asked our financial institutions to set strategies to identify goals with a gender lens always. Challenges are still there. I mean, having us on the top of the banking sector as leaders, we'd like to do some good, yet still cultural issues, religious issues, educational level remains to be challenges everywhere. We have chosen to partner with the National Council for Women in Egypt, which has outreach in 27 governorates. They know the problems firsthand. We've signed an MOU with them. We actually in Egypt, and that's something I wanted to highlight earlier on, a logo for women empowerment that is worn by all women. I will show it to you. I don't know if you'll be able to see it clearly, but it's a brooch. It wasn't clear that we wear. It's a silver brooch. It's actually a letter in the Arabic language, the ta' marbuta, that if you put it to on any adjective, on any word, the word becomes feminine. So this icon, this letter, the slogan for it is, have this letter as your means of empowerment and don't let it hinder you. This slogan is for social empowerment, economic empowerment, political empowerment, all sorts of empowerment, and all women wear it proudly in Egypt. I don't want to take too much because all through the discussion, I'll be sharing with you the efforts that we have done, the projects that we embarked on, all sorts of decisions that were done with the support of our leadership. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, May. I think that you mentioned the importance of women leadership and role models, and I think you're certainly one of them, and very inspiring. I also note your work around data and the importance of measuring the gender gap in order to close it, and this is something obviously I fully support and grateful for that. Data is still too scarce and to and we need more data and in order to make good decisions and informed decisions. I would like now to turn to Roshani and hear from you about how the products and services that your foundation is providing to all these women in Pakistan is contributing to financial inclusion and to closing this gender gap. So Roshani, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure. And I'd like to again thank the World Bank and the ITU for organizing this seminar. I'm going to take a slightly different spin on this whole thing. First, I absolutely agree it's a very important topic to talk about and speak about, and to change and question the discourse around women's leadership. Coming from a country where we've had a female prime minister, sometimes having a woman doesn't change things. Having a woman at the top is not going to change things. So we can be gender neutral and assume things are going to happen automatically when leadership changes and it's going to spill over and cascade down. But actually that doesn't happen. We have to use a gender intentional lens. So my take on this after 30 years of working with women entrepreneurs across Pakistan is that we really need to be conscious about this. The elephant is in the room and we really need to address that. So one of the first things that happens when you talk about women entrepreneurs or enterprises that are led by women, or when you talk about the economic empowerment of women, there is an occupational segregation. And COVID incidentally has brought this out, and I've seen data coming out of the World Bank, UN Women and others also, which is showing that because women are in frontline low paid jobs, those were the jobs that got affected most. And this is again showing you the disparity between male and female occupations. In the case of Pakistan, and I'll then talk about the context of how Kashf has tried to address this, and also talk a bit about the numbers, because I think one of the things we've learned over time as women in this field is that numbers matter, data matters. And counting the numbers and measuring change is also important. So you really need to stack it up and know where are you standing today and where you need to go. And that becomes very, very important, even from the perspective of financial inclusion. So the work that's been done through the Fintechs is very important because it gives us the trigger, it makes us understand how women are being left behind and what needs to be done. So if we look at the numbers in the financial sector, for example, today in Pakistan, and this is data that's been taken, that the State Bank is now collecting, which is our central bank, 13% of women are employed in the financial sector in Pakistan today, of whom only 6% are in management positions. So what we are really seeing is a leadership gap, and we need to understand why that is happening. And that's really the crux of the matter today. And I think the first good thing is, as I said earlier, also that we are mapping the numbers. If we look at occupational segregation and we compare the formal sector with the informal sector when it comes to women's economic participation, again, there's a huge gap. In the informal sector, which is the sector primarily that microfinance functions in, 85% of women are employed in some form of economic activity. However, at the same time, they're held back because of the notion of unpaid care. And again, COVID has brought that out. Women are the ones that are the providers of unpaid care. And what we've seen is, through my years of funding women in low-income families, entrepreneurship is forced upon women. It's not a natural inclination. So we really need to question ourselves, what is our education system doing? What is it teaching women? How is it training them? How is it bringing them up to become managers? What are the gaps that are there? So I think access to education becomes very, very important in this. If we turn this to the other side and look at formal labor force participation in Pakistan, and I'm just giving you Pakistan numbers just to see how big the divide is, that's again 20%. So what's going on? Women are simply not being employed in the formal sector. They are in the informal sector. So the dice is somehow going against them. They are not ending up with formal jobs, but they're ending up in informal. So they're creating jobs for themselves rather than becoming employed in the formal sector. And of course, there are several factors to this, whether we talk about patriarchy, which Therese was very kind not to use that term, but I think I'm one of those people who likes to talk about the terms and the normatives around certain behaviors. So it's very important for us to understand that in a lot of cultures, women are held back. They may even be educated. For example, in Pakistan, we are seeing that in the universities, 55% of the enrollment is female. So what's going on? How come they're not ending up in the formal sector? And when we try to unravel, and this is it's like, it's like peeling an onion. So this is a very long conversation we need to have, and we'll talk about some of the practical approaches that Kashf has used. But one of the principles I want to share here is that you have to do this intentionally. When you're designing products for women, you really have to see the ecosystem around entrepreneurship. So when Kashf started working, we studied women businesses. We understood the challenges they faced. So for example, we understood that gender is a problem. Gender definitions and roles are a problem. So we introduced gender trainings. We did financial education and business development trainings, but we ended up doing reproductive healthcare trainings too, because we realized that unless or until we took that issue up, women would not have enough free time to actually run their businesses effectively. So really, there's a whole value chain that goes around this issue, and it starts by first having the right questions and then seeking out the right answers. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very insightful, and again the importance of data to illustrate and act upon this gap, and the need for this holistic approach. And it's true that one action is certainly not enough. Having a woman leader, a prime minister is not enough. It might be a necessary but not sufficient condition, and this whole ecosystem that you're trying to put in place to really address this comprehensively. And we'll come back to this approach of addressing the gender gap, not in silo, but again as a holistic approach. Now turning to Laura, as part of your intervention, it would be great to hear what digital financial services, notably in Latin America, have been helping to close the gender gap. So Laura, over to you, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Thierry. First of all, I would like to thank ITU and the World Bank on behalf of the BBVA Microfinance Foundation to speak at this important and timely event. I will follow on Rosanne's comments and build on microfinance and entrepreneurship, which is our field of work, and more specifically on digital financial services and some trends we have observed in the Latin American region. BBVA Microfinance Foundation serves more than 2.6 million vulnerable entrepreneurs in Latin America through a group of 6 microfinance institutions in 5 countries, and 60% of which are women. There is no doubt that digital finance has played an integral role in the global response to the pandemic we've lived the past year and a half. And on the demand side, there has been a surge in new users, and as they find alternative ways to run and manage their businesses online. And on the supply side, financial institutions have really had to rethink their business models and delivery mechanisms to meet these needs. Though this rapid trend towards digital banking and cashless society has helped us to adapt to the mobility restrictions and is helping us to build back better, it can also further widen the divide between those already capable of accessing technology and those who cannot, and particularly in the case of the 1.5 million vulnerable female entrepreneurs we serve in the region. However, it is also true that the digital transformation in which we were already immersed over the past few years put us at an vantage point to ensure that these women are included. In the light of the pandemic, we ramped our digital products and services, such as mobile banking applications, so our entrepreneurs could access and manage their money from home, something which is very relevant for many women who face significant time and mobility limitations, as Rosanne was mentioning before, due to the unpaid care work. For instance, in Colombia, we have 172,000 active digital users, of which 63% are women, performing transactions such as transfers, cell phone recharges, purchases, or utility payments. And although these numbers are encouraging, we still have many challenges ahead. As I was saying, these solutions are helpful, but to secure the uptake, it is critical that clients have affordable internet and are digitally literate. And this is where women in low and middle income countries are often left behind. So in this post-COVID scenario, it is absolutely essential as well to have a diversified workforce. I think this is something that is very clear for all of us, and leadership also, in order to attend the challenges that our female entrepreneurs face. We must mention that our foundation is chaired by a woman, and that it has almost double the number of women in the board in the past 2 years, from a third in 2018 to 2/3 in 2020. This progress has been intentional and part also of the strategy towards greater internal equality. And in our microfinance institutions, 38% of our members, 47% of our top level management, and 51% of our staff are women. We have also different programs to develop women's talent and progress in all our institutions, and we have strong non-discriminatory policies in all of them. We have subscribed the UN Women Empowerment Principles, conducted gender gap analysis tool, and participated in regional equity rankings such as Equales, which is offering us a roadmap to pursue. So as you see, we are intentional about this, and for us, it's just the reverse side of the coin. If we want to develop a tailored value proposition for the women we serve, and we want to foster digital financial services and the uptake from these women, we must start at home with organizations which are fully committed to offer equal opportunities, and especially for all of our women. Thank you.
Thierry, I think you are on mute.
Yeah, I think you're mute.
Sorry, I had to do one of these. I had to. So yeah, thank you. And noting your point about the fact that that the potential of DFS to mitigate the effect of COVID, provided that there is access to digital technology, because there is no digital financial services without access to technology. So, and that's, either it could be a mitigator, but it could also be a divider if access to technology is not provided to all. So thanks a lot for this initial round of opening remarks. We have a number of questions for our panelists, Margaret and I. But I also would like to invite participants to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to take those on during the course of the conversation. But for now, I would like to maybe turn back to May from the Central Bank of Egypt, and asking her how to avoid making the issue of gender gap, to avoid that this issue is just a silo issue, so treated in isolation and not holistically, as we heard from Roshane earlier, the need for putting all, considering all things and not treating as a silo. And what have you been doing at the central bank to achieve this and try to avoid this gender silo and have an holistic approach? So May, if we can hear from you on that.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part, so I was a bit disconnected.
Oh, sir. No, I was just saying. I was just asking whether and what can you do, and what have you been doing at CBE to address the gender gap in a holistic manner, as opposed to treating as just a silo, the gender silo in isolation from other issues?
Thank you, Terry. Thank you again for the question. I think indeed the regulators do have a very crucial role to play in incorporating the gender lens in their policies. It has to be a holistic picture. They have to look at it on a very macro level, identifying the quick wins, identifying the challenges, being able to manage the challenges. But before digging deeply into what we have done, I would like to start by saying again that it all starts from the top. In Egypt, the political leadership has a cement belief that gender equality serves as an impetus for Egypt's economic growth and social welfare. Our president is a main supporter for women empowerment, and this is clearly manifested in many things. Our constitution, for example, includes about 20 articles on women's rights in various aspects of life. Women representation at the cabinet level reached about 24%. It's not only about percentage. More importantly, women at cabinet do occupy critical and influential ministerial posts that requires highest competency. On the level of our parliament, women representation reached about 25% for the first time. It's also worth mentioning that during the COVID crisis and since the beginning of the pandemic spread in Egypt, gender inclusive policies were set in place. To start with, the high-level committee for assessing the impact of COVID-19 included women representation, where women voices in the decision-making was highly evident. Having said that, and with the remarkable presence of women leaders, a lot of effort from different institutions has been put in place to outweigh all gender discrimination and include gender lens in policies and programs. Our Minister of Planning is a very strong female leader. She's very keen to include the gender lens in the implementation and regular review of the National Sustainable Development Strategy. We call it Egypt Vision 2030. The president of the National Council for Women has sponsored in 2017 the development of a national women's strategy which addresses without discrimination economic, social and political opportunities. And at the Central Bank of Egypt, our governor believes in the economic and social value created by elevating women's role in the society. Myself, being responsible for the financial inclusion portfolio and from day one, along with our teams, we have brought the promotion and coordination of a gender-inclusive financial system to the forefront of our development policy agenda, really. As I mentioned before, we have signed this protocol with the National Council for Women, enabling and promoting women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion, capitalizing on their outreach in many governorates and in most deprived areas of Egypt. And to date, as a regulator, we were able to achieve a number of milestones towards building an inclusive financial sector. This includes, as I mentioned earlier, applying a gender-centric regulatory intervention, modernizing the digital infrastructure, building a comprehensive gender disaggregated data, as I mentioned earlier, and last but not least, strengthening the protection, sensitization, awareness, and capabilities of women customers. I will stop at this and back to you, Terry. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Maybe turning now to Roshane, and we heard about the difficulty that and the stereotypes that affect the ability of women to enter a field and make a career and rise to the top. We see evidence that women have a harder time to get funded when they start their business. They face tougher questions private equity and venture capitalists, and it's just a harder pathway to get funding and get started and prosper. And do you face in your role as director of your foundation this kind of discrimination, if I may say, when it comes to raising funds for your organization? And what can you recommend, and what are your tricks and tips to overcome these stereotypes and succeed?
Thank you. A great question, and it has two sides to it. So I'll start with the first side to it. I think the first thing is that women just have to work harder to prove themselves. So let's admit it. It's not going to be easy. It's an uphill task. The second part of this is that as women, especially when we're doing fundraising, we really need to have the numbers. We need to show the impact. We need to show results. We need to communicate, and that becomes very important, especially when you come from a culture where women are told that they can't speak loudly. They have to speak softly. So I think really breaking many of our own stereotypes, it really begins with us. If we're talking with the notion of who we are, our authenticity as leaders. So at one side, it's knowing what we want, having the goals, and being able to communicate them, and then build the team around us to take our vision forward. That's something that even men face. It's not just a women leadership issue. But on the other side, we really need to look at the institutions. I think it's also important to who are you going to go and pitch this to? So a lot of times the institutions are also stuck in double binds. They assume, there are certain perceptions about women investors. That one of the first assumption or presumption is, or perception is, that women are risk averse. You'll hear this all the time. The perception is that women will not take that, the risk and return argument when it comes to a woman entrepreneur is going to be very different. In my culture, for example, when you approach a bank, the first question they'll ask you is, have you spoken to your husband about this? Have you consulted your family? So the assumption is that the woman doesn't have the wherewithal to make the correct financial decisions. That's another another aspect which prevents women from being able to reach out to investors. On the institutional side, when we look at women within institutions, when they're looking for employment or when they're looking for leadership positions, there was a research done by Forbes which showed some very interesting results. For every 100 positions that are open for promotion, almost 75% of them are filled by men, and 25% of them are filled by women. So what are we seeing? Women are 4 times less likely to get promoted. And the reasons for that is, and again, this is very interesting. One of the reasons is that women don't have the networks, and that is again related to the investor, their ability to get investment for their projects. A lot of times women lack the networking, sort of expertise. We are not the ones who are going to go play golf with the banker. Seriously, it's not the norm. So we won't get those transactions done informally. A lot of times we have to go, we have to open the door, we have to knock on the door, we have to push through to get those transactions to happen. So again, that lack of networking is something that prevents women from not only getting the investments they require or the amount of investment. We saw the difference. Men were able to raise 35 billion, women were only able to raise 500 million. So when you see that differential, a lot of it has to do with that aspect. Women are also trying to negotiate as hard as men. That's not the case. But it's really people sitting on the other side of the table in terms of seeing and understanding, what is being communicated, because the perceptions are so strong. What we've also seen, and again, this is very interesting, and this has happened in my organization as well, because 50% of my cadre is women and 50% is men. And 50% of the female managers, 50% of the management is women and 50% of the management is men. But when we look at annual performance reviews and we start assessing them, the bell curve for men is very different from the bell curve from women. So, and women will do as well on the quantifiable indicators, but when it comes to the qualitative indicators on the performance reviews, that's where they get lower numbers. So again, this goes back to perceptions, and it goes back to being on the negotiating table. So, I always, I always listen to Mary Ann Slaughter's, reviews, and she says women can't have it all. To get it all, you really have to push your way through. So unfortunately, right now at this moment, it's not that women do not have the expertise, the acumen, the ability. It's really the perception that creates the glass ceiling, both within institutions and within the investor space. And that's where we need to work harder. So I'll just stop here.
If I could just come in for a minute on the point on the investment, something in the data that I don't think showed up clearly. When it was women alone, they got a woman-only funder group or founder group got half of the funds on average as a male only. But if you add a male to women, so if you have women and men together, there's almost no difference. So it goes, I think, to that with the men. So that kind of the social aspects that you're talking about how people are saying, do you have what it takes to lead? It's not about the competency. It's about sometimes some of these other things with the comfort level maybe that people have with, can this woman be a leader, or can she be part of this leader when, seeing that differently when there are men or not men at the table, and kind of understanding that variation. I think that's really key.
But the interesting thing, thank you, Margaret, for raising that. The interesting thing is in microfinance, it's the other way around. When it comes to accessing finance, it's women who are the leaders in terms of getting access to finance. You'll see that everywhere. But then when we go on the other side, which is looking at economic agency, are we really able to create that? Do they have control over their incomes? That's where we are losing out.
I see May shaking her head. I'm sorry, Thierry, I don't know if you wanted to come in or not.
Please, May, please, if you want to intervene, let's make it as much of a conversation as possible. So feel free to jump in.
No.
Thank you so much.
No.
I'm okay.
Okay, all right.
I was just reading the question that was sent about leadership in central banks. I was just reading that, and it is quite a challenge that there are no central banks or very few central banks that have governor as the female leader for the central banks. So in Egypt, for example, we've never had a female governor. Let's see if this is going to change soon, but it's coming. So I was just reading the statistic. That's why I was laughing.
And just on that point, something that I became aware of recently, Kristalina Georgieva, who's in charge of the fund, has appointed a person to be a senior gender advisor, a new role in terms of the level of seniority. So hopefully with Madame Lagarde and Kristalina, if there's opportunity to encourage regulators along this path as well. So over to you, Thierry.
Thanks. Turning to you, Laura, your foundation, the BBVA Microfinance Foundation, is a huge player in its field. I think you provided around $600 million in 2019 in loans. And what is the impact of your activities, and how are you shifting the perspective on women's issue through your engagements, and what are, sorry, it's a multi-barrel question, but what are the most effective and most catalytic investments that contribute to your success?
Thank you. I will try to answer both questions. So first, yes, you're right. The OECD just recognized us as the first philanthropic initiative in gender equality and funding gender equality in the region. And the figure you gave is correct. And we're also the first philanthropic initiative in Latin America. And we have two main lines of activity. One is the one that I already mentioned, that we have created a group of microfinance institutions in the region. And the second one that is really relevant for us is to transform the sector, to contribute to its transformation, the microfinance sector in the region. So as part of this effort, we have established agreements with other organizations to advance and multiply the impact of our activities. We have engaged in different global and regional initiatives. And just to mention a few, we have ECOSOC consultative studies, which allows us to participate at UNCSW, alliances with UN Women. We are members of the OECD GenderNet. We are part of the Universal Financial Access, etc. And also at the national level, we're working tirelessly with governments, international organizations, and the private sector and civil society to advocate for financial inclusion as an effective way to improve women's economic empowerment. And this is because in Latin America still, and according to World Bank estimates, MSMEs still have a financial gap, female MSMEs still have a financial gap of $98 billion. So it is evident we cannot solve this problem only by ourselves. And we need to move the needle to bridge the gender financial gap. And for this aim, there's just one way, in our opinion, it's to lead by example. So this is why we have made women's economic empowerment a priority. We have designed a specific strategy in our MFIs. We have created and still are creating a specific value proposition that serve women's needs, forging alliances and raising awareness about the obstacles that female entrepreneurs still face today. And at some point, we think that the sector will fall. Indeed, change is happening in the region, with many financial institutions addressing the opportunities that women represent with specific value propositions, or even recently issuing gender bonds, many times with the support and assistance of the IFC or the Inter-American Development Bank in the region. In our case, and I'm moving to the second part of your question, our annual social performance report and our gender disaggregated data, which is something that May and Rosanne mentioned before, the importance of gender disaggregated data, contribute to break the negative biases against financial inclusion of women. And this is the most important driver, to have data. And for us also, it is to believe in the power and the potential of our 1.5 million female entrepreneurs, their businesses and their ability to thrive. We offer them a combination of financial products, not just loans, also savings and insurance, together with financial education and some other non-financial services, such as digital skills, training, access to markets, networks, and so on. And our data show year after year that despite their inferior initial disbursement levels of sales, assets, and incomes, when compared to male clients, they are capable of growing at faster rates in these three dimensions, and they abandon their initial poverty at higher rates than men. Moreover, 8 in our 10 clients who overcame poverty in the last 5 years were women. And their non-performing loan rates are 25% lower than men. So this is how we dismantle gender biases towards women in the financial industry, by having data, by advocating for financial inclusion, by showing this data, and we think that this is how, like, little by little, the sector will move towards there. So we also think that digital transformation, it's also paramount nowadays. It is not just an option, it's something that it's key. And this is probably right now the most fundamental driver of our success in the recent years, and also has allowed us to be better prepared to weather the recent pandemic. So with technology, we're taking the brands to our clients' homes, saving transaction costs, and offering flexibility in daily operations for many of these women, which have mobility restrictions because of the amount of unpaid work, and becoming more efficient and quick in our loan disbursements. And I think This is why digital financial services are becoming also so relevant in the industry, and the sector is moving towards the here. So I don't know if I managed to answer both questions, but I will stop here for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think, yeah, this again, the power of data, not only to inform decision making, but to address the issue of stereotypes that keep coming back and through the different intervention, and this contributes. When you show performance, when you show success through the data, you can start addressing or breaking those stereotypes. Thanks a lot, Margaret. Over to you. I know that you have some questions for panelists.
Thank you, Thierry. And yeah, so maybe pivot a little bit, but very much along the lines of what everybody's been discussing around this pipeline issues. And I wanted to start with Roshana, and I love that you brought up the exact, your figures in Pakistan, that 13% of financial services employees were women, but only 6% then in managerial roles. Pakistan is such a young country. There's huge potential to encourage women into this space. And I'm just curious also if you see this maybe being easier sometimes when you look at digital, when you look at fintechs, digital financial services. I've been doing some work on Latin America region in the last few weeks, and they actually outperform women are more likely to be funders in fintechs in Latin America than the global average, even though the financial services industry isn't, it isn't necessarily a place where you have so many women in leadership roles, but it is a bit more in fintech. So also curious how you see that technology piece playing in to getting more young women into that initial step, so that, then they can, over the years, really change in terms of leadership profiles.
Great, thank you. And I think the technology question becomes very relevant in the context of COVID as well, because as we had Laura talk about this also, we got pushed into this. This was not something we were working towards it, but we somehow had to cross the river instantly, given the circumstances. So I'll talk about the digital in a minute, but prior to that, I think I'll take up your question on youth and how do we get young women into the labor force, and what do we need to do as institutions? Because there was a very interesting question in the question answer panel as well, related to this as well. Is it women's responsibility to do this, or is the society or the institutions or the educational system or the government's responsible for this too? So I strongly adhere to the notion that we have to create gender inclusive spaces within our organizations. We have to have policies, we have to be conscious of this, and to create those, there are several ways that we can do it. And again, this is hard work. It's not going to happen automatically. It's something that you have to be very conscious of, and you have to handhold. Now, let me talk about Kash's experience. When I started almost 27 years ago, I was working from a completely different notion. I built an organization which was run by women for women. So all our staff was women. We didn't hire men. We discriminated against men, and we said, "You're not welcome here. Sorry, economic empowerment of women is only women's problem." Well, things changed along the way, and we realized gender is everyone's problem, unless gender inequality is everyone's problem. And we really need to bring the men into this discussion, and the notion of having he for she, or having male champions for change, and also having women champions for change within the organizations is equally important. Not only that, I think the issue of pipelining that you've talked about, how do we bring female managers up? That has to start from the bottom tier, consciously. You have to, for example, in our case, we don't open a branch if we can't hire 50% women there. We simply don't. It's mandated that we have to do this. Now, I wouldn't have said this earlier, but we have in Pakistan, we owe this to Pizza Hut and McDonald's. And this is not a funny comment. It's actually a very serious comment, because they went out there, and when they opened, and this is prior to the time that I was setting up Kash, when they went out, when they started establishing franchises here, they said, "Sorry, we will not come in the country until 50% of our frontline staff are women." So that started changing. So sometimes you have to do groundbreaking things within your institutions as well. Or mandate them. It's not about affirmative action. I think we also have to put that language away. That's a lens that we should not use when we talk about inclusion. So I think it's about saying, as you correctly pointed out, Margaret, when you were mentioning, it's about returns, it's about sustainability, it's about corporate development and growth. So the first thing we really have to do is to train the top managers on gender diversity. That goes without saying. And you'll have to do this like Chinese torture over and over again. It's not, and this is interestingly, Margaret, what I've learned over the years, having a female manager is not good enough either, unless she's sensitized. Sometimes the men are more sensitized and they're able to develop women leaders from below much better than a woman does. So again, that we imbibe patriarchy, unfortunately, even though, if you see a woman driving on the road, what's your first reaction? It's going to be, oh, she's a bad driver. She's not, or she's a slow driver, or she's overly careful. Of course, insurance companies think we are better risk. So that goes without saying. The second thing is, I think we have to have career counseling and career planning from the word go, both for men and women, but especially for women. And that, in central banks also, I think that's something we need to do, whether we're talking about financial entities or whether we're talking about regular institutions. Then we need to invest in coaching and mentoring. As I was mentioning earlier, women tend to lack, they're more diffident, they hold themselves back. So they don't build their networks, especially if they're coming from a society where women's voices are not heard. So you really need to have mentors for them. You need to have coaching and pipelining programs for women leaders at all levels. And you need to make sure, in our case, it's 50%. If we need area managers, let's say, we need 10 of them. You've got to find, the HR already knows, 5 of them have to be women. So they create that pipeline going forward. We also need to rewrite perceptions on women's leadership roles. And that's a very interesting point. A lot of research has been done on this by the Harvard Business School. Women, if a woman is assertive as a leader, she's considered to be a bad leader. But if a man is assertive, that's wonderful. That's what he's supposed to be. So we really need to rewrite those perceptions. And this is not just women having to do that. I think men and women have to do this jointly. And then my point going, and I'll just stop here. I can go on ad nauseum, but I'll just stop here. I mean, it's also about having gender intentional policies, HR policies. So for example, at Kush, we realized as life changes happen for women, we started losing many of our very, valiant, strong, robust female managers. They got married and they had children and they left. Now, one way could be, okay, we'll hire new people and we'll replace them. But we started unraveling the problem, and we realized a lot of it had to do with perceptions regarding harassment at the workplace. So what we started was a program which sounds a little funny, but again, it's serious, Not Without My Mother-in-Law. So the program is, the moment one of our staff members is engaged to be married, we actually invite the in-laws to the office, to our branches, and we show them how the space is, how men and women are working together, how it's equitable, how voices will be heard, and how seriously we take up the issue of harassment. And it goes up right to my level. So, it's a very serious offense. So these are the kind of things that sometimes you have to do consciously, sometimes you have to do a dog and pony show to get them happening. But measuring change is very, very important. The more I stress that, I've learned it. If you forget the numbers, nothing's going to happen. If you link the numbers to performance and accountability, then gender dynamics will change. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Well, great comments. So I think, and I hope we can, on this set of issues, have our different panelists come in. So please feel free to come back in as we talk about this. So May, I wanted to move to you, and actually Roshana just mentioned central banks and in terms of thinking about that pipeline. So, where you get women in to the entry level in some places. So it's still, some places we still have the entry level problem, and other places women are 50% of the workforce, like the US, they're actually more than half. But just this spring, the first Wall Street bank, so to speak, major US bank, has a woman president, and that's Citigroup. But you look at who was, other industries, which you might say are more male dominated, or it certainly don't have an image of being less, such as technology, IBM, General Motors. Years ago, they had female presidents in these other industries. So, how do we create how do we move from getting women in that door, in both thinking about the central bank and regulatory space, but also private sector, to really moving them, giving them the skills and the opportunities to be able to go all the way to the top.
Thank you, Margaret. To reply to it, actually, would like to agree with what Rojana mentioned a while ago, that women's support has to be intentional. It has to be intentional. We cannot just be gender neutral. So I agree with her. And because we noticed at the central bank that at entry level, we had no issues. We had no issues at entry level. So we had gender equality. We have a balance when at entry level. We've noticed that there is a glass ceiling affecting the women career development, and it's evident in the declining numbers of females moving from middle management to more senior positions. Those challenges come in different aspects. They are not only lack of sponsorship. It comes from different factors, such as, for example, personal factors like self-perception, like work-life balance is another problem that they face, but also other factors include organizational factors. For example, the lack of confidence in women's capabilities and the lack of information for bridging the gap between men and women. Also, cultural factors play a big role there in the presence of unintended biases. Accordingly, we started to implement a set of initiatives and programs that aim to help women grow and qualify them to climb the career ladder confidently. Of course, those initiatives would not have seen the light without the tremendous support from our male leader, our role model, the Governor Tariq Amer. These initiatives have been taking place for the last maybe 3-4 years. The first I'd like to share with you is our mentorship and sponsorship program. We started that back in 2017, whereby the Central Bank of Egypt collaborated with the National Council for Women and the Top 50 Women platform and launched a women mentoring program. This is a program where we brought a number of middle management potential leaders, we called our mentees, from diverse industries, not only from the financial sector. We put them together with a cohort of women leaders, our mentors, and the program included one-to-one mentoring sessions. It included strategic workshops, focus on building leadership skills, as well as social events where mentees met and learned from experiences of influential female figures. Currently, the CBE is collaborating, for example, with Women World Banking to roll out an internal leadership program for all CBE female employees. Another very important initiative is dedicating an annual award for outstanding female calibers in the whole banking sector. This award provides the winners with an excellent leadership learning opportunity at prestigious universities such as Harvard Business School, for example. We've been also working internally on our HR policies to remove any barriers that hinder equality at the workplace. So we are introducing a new HR policy, which includes working from home for women on childcare leave, a part-time job. We did not have part-time job at the central bank. Paternity leave, we are studying the potential to avail subsidized nearby childcare facilities. We are very optimistic and confident that by sustaining these initiatives, along with raising gender diversity awareness, we will be able to have coming cohorts of accomplished females that are able to assume leadership by merit and have a ripple effect and influence on their surroundings and on the following generations. Last but not least, I tend to agree again with Rojana on measurement. It's important and very important to mention that in order to manage, we should be able to measure. Therefore, the institution should always develop a monitoring and evaluation system to assess the gender composition of the workforce across different managerial levels and track its progress over time. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you. To all three of the panelists, I just have a question because this is very, inspiring to hear what has been done, what from the efforts being taken in Egypt and the central bank. I love the Not Without My Mother-in-Law program that Roshana was mentioning about how do you really keep women in the workforce, which is a challenge in many places and probably every place with different life moments. For the people who are on the call today on this webinar who are in a place that hasn't adopted any of these kinds of policies, where there's not let's say widespread awareness, or where we were talking on a different call about where maybe when women's issues are brought up, some people may kind of chuckle and say, laugh a bit and say, well, this isn't really a serious topic. This is something that's not part of our bottom line. Why do we need to talk about this? How do you have any recommendations of kind of strategically, if you're male or female and you're interested in being a change maker, how do you start this in an organization? And I don't know if any of you want to jump in. I mean, this wasn't one of our kind of pre questions, but I just think this is, if I'm sitting here, I want to know, how can I get this started? Who would like to go first?
I can take it if you want.
Great, Laura, and then feel free as well, May and Roshana, after,
yes.
If you have comments.
Well, I think like the first thing anyone can do is to talk about it. I mean, and here I'm talking from my personal perspective and my experience. When I started going to lots of different fora on financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment, I think I became sensitized myself. So I started wondering what else could we do at the foundation, and it was clear that it wasn't just a coincidence that 60% of our total clients were women and have been traditional. This figure has kept like this for years. So we started digging in. I mean, so I offered the CEO to start creating a working group internally at the foundation to look much more in depth to this gender strategy, and see how were our women, what were their social, economic, and financial characteristics, get to know them much better, starting disaggregating gender data or social performance report, not just staying at, okay, 60% of them are women and that's all, so okay, I want to know who are they, how are they, where are their businesses based, how do they perform, how are their loans, what are the gender gaps, how do they overcome poverty, what are we offering them, and is there a connection between what we offer and their needs? Do we need to innovate? Do we need to create more specific products and services? And how about non-financial services as well? So we started this conversation. We put together a strategy. We talked about this to all the CEOs, which some of them were already jumped in and were already had a deep buy-in, because their institutions or microfinance institutions were created to serve women and vulnerable entrepreneurs in the region. So there was not a lot of work to do there. But for some, there was a bigger need to make the case of why designing a specific value proposition, and what was what were the benefits of doing this, and at the end we managed to set a joint commitment, a corporate commitment, and we put in place a strategy that not only looks at our clients and how to serve better and promote women's businesses and so they can thrive and reap all the benefits and all the opportunities that we can offer to them, but also internally, how do we go about this? How are we looking at this? Are we sensitized? Do we have any unconscious stereotypes? That is something that May and Rosanna have talked about, and it's all over the conversation. What about our unconscious biases from banking agents, do we have some stereotypes that are preventing these women to thrive? Are we giving lower disbursements or lower loans to these women because we see them as less capable, even if it's unconscious, even if it's not something that intentional, but is it happening? Do we have some restrictions in place that we're not aware of? So internally, you also need to work. I mean, you have to make the case, you have to convince, and set the tone at the top. This is like something very clear, and then you have to make it come down through a cascade, and of course you have to go to the bank agents and sensitize them on these questions, because maybe they haven't even realized that the financial products and services, or most of the financial products and services we deliver, were gender neutral. So this is how we did it in the foundation, and based on my personal experience. This is my personal experience and opinion, of course, but I think that we can all play a part in this. It's not something that has to come from the top. We can voice these needs, and we can make the case and try to make something about it. So this is it. Back to you, Margaret. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. No, that was really helpful. I mean, just to see how, the path that you took. And I think that understanding those paths is really helpful for people who are maybe navigating this alone or at the beginning of a process. May or Roshana, would you like to come in on this point in any way?
Sure. So thank you, Margaret. And I'd just like to add to what Laura said. I think the first thing we need to do, practically speaking, is to develop what we call a diversity and inclusion code for the organization. And that code should then be the lens through which we assess all policies that are made, whether it's product policies, whether it's operational policies, whether it's HR policies, whether it's compensation, what have you. So that really becomes the crux of the matter. Who are we, what we want to be, what is our DNA telling us? So putting that down helps. The second thing is measurement. Where are you today and where do you want to go? So practically speaking, if 6% of your managers are women, well, then you should set a realistic goal. Let's say you say we'll double it in 1 year. And to do that, what are the building blocks that need to be there in place? The third thing you need to do in your organization, which becomes very important, is a pulse survey on gender sensitivity. You must do research regularly to understand what do people really believe. A lot of times what happens is when you introduce things like daycare centers, which is a very important tool for making sure your female staff stays on board. Men may feel, well, we are not being taken care of by the organization. So you have to counter that, by making the men understand that this is important for women, but also looking at things like, paternity leave, as May was mentioning. So you really need to balance that, and you need to keep understanding how men feeling in the organization and how women feeling in the organization, and what are their perceptions that need to be addressed. Because as I was saying, it's really perceptions that mold outcomes, and it's really perceptions that will determine who stays with the organization and who doesn't. So you really need to understand what's going on. Then develop, Laura was saying you have to start talking about it. In addition to that, you must have appropriate trainings for every level. So for example, when a staff is hired in Kashf, they automatically go through a 2-day gender sensitization training. That's got to be done. Otherwise, the orientation isn't complete. So from the very word go, you need to start filling in the gaps and start talking about these things. Then again, to make this process that is sustainable, you need to have gender champions at each level within the regions, the areas, however your organization is structured. It becomes very important to have these gender champions, and we've seen those have worked very well because they are the go-to people, and they can be men and women, but they have to be appropriately trained. So that they can answer some of the questions, whether it's related to, one of the things we've seen is that social media has really changed gender relationships. And you really need to educate people on how to use WhatsApp groups, how to use messaging, how to use Facebook, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate behavior on that, and those, this has changed. This has created a lot of gray in the way relationships, professional relationships are managed. And last but not least, of course, you have to have practical solutions. I already mentioned some of them, daycare centers, and the government and regulation can help here. For example, in Pakistan, it's mandated for an organization to have a daycare facility if you have more than 30 staff. So again, the government can come in and set these standards. Paternity leave, again, is regulated by labor laws. So a lot of these are things that you can build in. Sexual harassment at the workplace is also very important that you need to deal with. And you must have policies to handle these. So if you look at all of these steps, these can be, this can be the plan to enhance the diversity and inclusion levels within an organization. But of course, as you go forward, you will learn and you will make mistakes also. That happens too. There will be failures along the way, but the failures help you succeed in the long run. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if May, you wanted to come in, or if I should go to the next question and maybe bring you all in on that. Did you want to say anything on this specifically, May, or should we go on?
As you wish. I just related very much with what you mentioned when you notice smiles across the table when you start discussing gender directions, and comments that keep on popping up from our culture, saying that very soon we'll be needing men empowerment, something related to that. So this really there is, and I agree with Roshana again that perception is very important. Building. Understanding the importance of diversity. We are different. We complement each other. It's not about human rights as much as complementing the workforce with needs. It's having the women on top of on the institution really supports other women, and they make sure that the gender lens is mainstreamed and that the policies are well addressed according to the needs. I was shocked when one of the banks came to me with a pink credit card, a credit card that was just pink in color, and saying that's a product for women. Come on, this is not it. It's all about the needs and what is needed out there. We have to check what customer needs, and that is why also one of our projects is deliberately focused on women, very poor women in needy area. It's the digitization and formalization of the Village Saving Group Association. I know this is a setup in many countries, but really we have a wonderful experience in digitizing. So instead of the women collecting their money in cash in the boxes, we've digitized that process. We taught them how to use mobile money. We taught them how to, we issued the national IDs for them. And we started to make them feel that they are important, that they can empower themselves, that they can really save and collect money from each other and fund their own nano businesses and repair their homes and borrow for emergencies. This really made them feel, because we saw the need, we saw what they want. It made us amplify this project from a pilot of 100 women with all the stakeholders in Egypt, that we are now having a project funded by the central bank and focused only on those women, targeting about 100,000 women in the most needed or the poorest governance of Egypt. So again, it is all about need, demand, what is there? And that's not only on the level of customers, it's also internal. So the importance of diversity again, it's a slow consensus process that we need to go through. You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, May, and Roshana and Laura. I mean, this is, I think, kind of going towards where I think we wanted to kind of wrap this session, because we're a few minutes, I guess we're 5 minutes out. Is that right, Thierry?
Yes, correct.
From close. So I don't know. Should we kind of move towards then the kind of some of the concluding remarks, inviting that?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So I mean, unless
maybe
you want
like
to
the
ask.
final. No, go ahead. Do you want to ask like kind of our final, question of the panelists?
Yeah, maybe. So I mean, we've already heard like a lot of advices and concrete solutions and good practices, but maybe as the male representative today, I would ask the panelists very quickly, very briefly, for one piece of advice to the male audience of today's session. One piece of advice as to what in their role they can do to advance the agenda, and again, what the most impactful or the practical action that they could take in their role, assuming that they are quite high in the hierarchy. Maybe we can start with Laura, and then we'll continue with Roshane and conclude with May. So Laura, maybe your piece of advice.
Yeah, well, you that's quite a question. That's a well, I think like the role of the man is absolutely essential. I mean, this is not just women working for women or talking about women. I mean, I think we won't be able to change any of the gender gaps, any of them, or close the gender gap that you mentioned from the World Economic Forum, if men don't jump into the sphere. This is something that concerns all of us, not just women. The challenge is how to involve men. And in my view, I mean, women have also a big part of it. I mean, a big role to play in this, and we need to be much more inclusive and much more concerned that in this type of panels and events, there are also men that are able to talk about these topics, and this is how we'll be able to start changing things. I mean, I think like one basic thing men could do is to start wondering about and questioning about their gender social norms. And this is something difficult, and there is some of them, and some of women as well, are reluctant to do it because it's how we've been educated, all of us, in these social norms. So we need to start thinking about what are our biases and beliefs on women and technology, and women in the financial sector, women as leaders, women as entrepreneurs, and we have to start asking ourselves about this and dismantling all these biases, and really making sure whether these are beliefs or are true statements that can be found in data and evidence. So I would say this, and then another thing I think it would be to really become champions, not being afraid of supporting gender equality, because I think that some men fear to be civilized and are in front of this cause. So I think that since many of the top managers are men, I think they have a big part in changing structures, in finding women talent, in promoting this talent, in mentoring this talent, and also being role models for other men. So that would be like my two suggestions: social norms and role modeling and mentoring for women talent. You're muted, I think.
Over to you, Roshani. Thank you. We have a couple of minutes before we need to concluding.
Right. So I'll keep it very short. I feel men need to start practicing this from their homes. It becomes very important. I think the notion of bringing up compassionate boys and confident girls is where we need to start, because that's where the problem begins. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And May, the final word.
Just to understand that the intention is not to push women and just to force them upon the workforce. It's more like understanding and making sure that their barriers are removed, and to make sure that they will earn those positions by merit. And that's why we need to keep measuring. We need to keep measuring because gender neutral does not necessarily mean that we are gender equal. So that's it on my side, and back to you, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's 6:30 in Geneva, so it's time to close. I mean, it's been a incredibly rich discussion. I mean, if you were to watch the video, you could extract, I think, a cookbook, a toolkit on how to improve things on the ground. It's been incredibly concrete experiences, practices, things that worked. We heard about the broad guiding principles, the importance of a holistic approach, the importance of data and measurement, those good principles, and again, all these very concrete initiatives that have, that worked in your geographies, but I'm sure that they could be scaled up, they could be reproduced elsewhere. Again, very grateful for the very concrete discussion, and a big thank you from ITU and the World Bank to the panelists, and thank you to the participants for being with us today. I just wanted to remind you that the next session of the FIGI Symposium will be on the 25th of May at 1300 Geneva time. It will be on DFS in China. Also, you will have the opportunity to, I would invite you to take the survey to give your feedback on this session. It's very important for us to improve ourselves and deliver a better experience to you in the future. So please take the survey. So with that, I'll conclude. Thanks a lot again. And Margaret, if you want to have the very last words, it's for you.
Just thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Thierry and ITU for the partnership with this, as well as to the CPMI, and thanks to the great active participation of our audience, who really, I think, shows the importance of this topic, and I hope we continue to be able to highlight it in our work as we go forward. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.